To the Planning and Development Committee meeting of October 10, 2019, acknowledging that we are meeting today within the Sechelt Traditional Territory. I'd like to also welcome Dave Patey. Dave is the Manager of Planning and Development, and this is his first board meeting with us. So welcome, Dave, and look forward to many more board meetings with us. Thank you. I'd like to add one item to the agenda. A copy has been handed out to council, to the board rather, and this is a letter from Mr. Matt Marquette and of 1741 Jensen Road, and this will be added to Annex C, item number 5 on your agenda. And could I have a motion to add this to the agenda? Moved. Seconded. All in favor? Could I have a motion to approve the agenda, adopt the agenda as amended? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. And sorry? Oh, and Mr. Thijs is away today in Portugal apparently, where we all should be, I think, but he didn't invite us, so that we're going to have our chair act as the vice chair for this committee. Could I have a motion to approve Lori Pratt as vice chair? Moved and seconded. Okay, all in favor? Thank you. You can stay. Look at that.
Oh, it's
kind of a popularity thing, you know. Oh. I'd be interested if you lost that vote. Yeah.
Well, yes, it would.
And our first item on the agenda. And Kayla Feenstra, the co-vice chair of the Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society. And welcome, Kayla. You made it just in time. Please have a seat, and you have a presentation for us. And this is Annex A, pages 1 to 8 of your agenda, Council. Board.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I apologize for my lateness. There was a logging truck doing 40, and it was
Oh,
so
yeah, the
much
road was
fun.
shut down, yeah. But you're right on time.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And thank you for having me. So in front of you, you have our proposal. I'm not really going to speak a lot about that proposal other than it's for your information about projects that we are endeavoring to accomplish this year. As co-vice chair, we've been working on obtaining funding for 2 key staff positions within our organization, an executive director and a project manager. We're also interested in obtaining an administrative assistant, other positions that are key to implementing and executing our capital projects currently in town of Gibsons. So currently we have a development on Franklin Road in the Gibsons Landing. It's a 3-unit development. And we're looking forward to turning soil on that very, very, very soon. We're just waiting for final lease agreements with BC Housing. As well, we have another development also in the town of Gibsons on Shaw Road. It's a 40-unit development, and we're currently going through the design process. Town of Gibsons Council passed the 3rd reading on that, as well as the public hearing went very, very well. And we're very impressed with the level of support that we've gained from the community on both of these projects, which are both on town of Gibson's owned land. So I wanted to come today to speak to the SCRD about these projects, just so that you're aware of what we're doing. And we are also speaking with developers with interest in land in the SCRD, as well as in the District of Sechelt. We've had interest from Powell River as well. I have 6 different projects sitting in front of our board right now that we could move on, but we are unable to move on those until we've employed staff to address those. One of the things that we're interested in seeing happen in the SCRD, as well as across the Sunshine Coast, is a housing conference. And I would love to see if the SCRD would be a sponsor of that conference. We would love for all of the planners across the Sunshine Coast to come speak at this conference. We would love for the OCPs to be available at this conference. We would love to invite national, provincial, international speakers at this conference and discuss different housing initiatives, different endeavors that are occurring across Canada or anywhere else that are also perhaps implementable here on the Sunshine Coast. I would love for the SCRD to provide the venue for the conference as well as advertising. We would take care of the event planning, we would take care of the ticketing, we would take care of all the financials. We would just love to see the SCRD partner in this way. Another item I would love to propose to the SCRD is to look into community amenity contributions paid by hospitality and tourist developments, valued over $2 million, or with an intent to employ 5 or more people. Currently, housing development are taking the brunt of all of the community amenity contributions. And because of the amount of people that are employed in tourism and hospitality, we would encourage the SCRD into looking to creating CACs for those developments. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. First of all, I'd like a motion from the board to receive the Annex A, which is in the package. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. And does the board have any questions this morning? Director McMahon.
I thought I read that the MRDT could be used towards housing. Did I read that somewhere? And so how does that relate to the CAC, or does
the MRDT is collected currently by Sunshine Coast Tourism. They're currently working on what percentage of that MRDT, the tax, would go into affordable housing contributions, but the majority of it is still considered to be used for their advertising, marketing, branding, all that kind of thing for actual tourism endeavors.
And just for the minutes, would you explain what the MRDT is?
It's a tax on tourist accommodation, and I don't remember what it stands for.
Oh, okay, you just throw the acronym out there.
Yeah.
It's a terrible acronym. Yes.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. The MRDT was set as 2% on the Sunshine Coast, and initially it was not applied to accommodations of less than 4 units. Once they applied it to less than 4 units, it's that additional funding that is then made available for affordable housing. And so the province actually can keep track of what that is because they can determine where it comes from. We would need to apply to tourism, Sunshine Coast Tourism, and have them agree with the proposal to be able to allocate the funding that comes from that to specific affordable housing initiatives.
Just a question for my information. Is that something the regional district can do, or is that something that is municipalities only?
It can be any government. They have to actually apply to have it be a program and have to sell it to all of their funders, right?
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Other questions? Director Hills. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Thanks for the presentation. And my kind of question is, what's the current relationship between the Housing Society and the Regional District? Is there an outstanding MOU, terms of reference? What is that relationship, and is there any paper around that relationship?
Thank you. We have extensive documentation on the history that I've just come across, and I'm very grateful to have access to. Sunshine Coast Affordable Housing Society started as a committee in 2013 with funding from the SCRD, Town of Gibsons, and District of Sechelt. They were funded for 3 years, and they did extensive research into housing affordability, needs assessments, demographics, all of that. And I'm happy to make those documents available. They're very valuable. You can find them in the recesses of the SCRD documents, but I have easy access to them. Does that help answer your question? We don't currently have any MOUs. We would love to gain a more formal partnership with the SCRD, as well as perhaps a letter of partnership or a letter of support, that kind of thing, especially as we intend to work together to solve our housing crisis.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. I was actually on that committee, And the mandate of the committee was to become self-sustaining and not have to rely on the municipal governments for funding at that point, right, for ongoing work. I understand what you're doing here.
Yep.
That's my question around this. Are you looking to become self-sustaining? Because you're looking at, 3 years of funding that you're approaching various parties with? And I would assume that the types of activities that you're looking at doing would be funded by projects that you would be taking on.
Correct.
So explain how that works.
Yes. So we do have a financial sustainability plan, and one of our hired staff would actually be in charge of getting the nitty-gritty fine details out of that. I was unaware when I joined the board of the extensive history and unaware of these documents. I actually just came across them last month. So I've read over 50,000 pages of reports and documents and all that just in this last month. So I actually wrote this proposal before finding that. And I would have hoped that a lot of this work would have been done by now. However, because the board has been volunteers only, and there was no expectation on the board as volunteers, right? The volunteers shouldn't really have those expectations on them. Maybe somebody could have been contracted to develop all of those plans, but it is our intention to never ask for funding regionally anywhere ever again. I have been writing extensive grant applications as well for funding. So that's part of why I'm not asking for funding from the SCRD today, because I don't want to do that. I want to ask for partnership. I want to ask for support. I want to let you guys know what we're doing. I would love to enter a conversation about solving these problems, because these problems have been talked about for way too long.
Director McMahon?
I had been going to ask about sustainability too. I'm wondering if the most appropriate thing that we could do is refer this back to staff to bring a recommendation to us on how to best go forward with this. Do you think that's our best option? Because this sounds great. We obviously care about affordable housing. It's a huge issue in our community. And a housing conference certainly sounds really interesting. So, but it's the nuts and bolts of how to do it is not it's not here at this desk. So that's my suggestion. I guess that's a motion. Refer to staff to come back with a proposal around a housing conference.
Yes. Further discussion? Second that. Director Howard, do you have your hand up? Yeah.
Director McMahon addressed my question.
Okay, good. Okay. Any further discussion required on that? The request that staff, the SCRD sponsor affordable housing concert for the Sunshine Coast and help find a venue. That's a big challenge on the Sunshine Coast, a venue for kind of what you're looking at is kind of a national, provincial, national level conference, and that's a challenge, of course. But not something that's impossible, and so that motion to refer that to staff. Any further discussion?
And that's specifically around the conference?
Sorry?
That's specifically around.
Specifically around the conference, yes. Yeah. Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, so thank you, Kayla. That was being referred to staff to investigate that opportunity and report back to the board.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And just for the board's information, the town of Gibson did also receive a request for funding and has agreed to grant $30,000 in 2019 and $50,000 for 2020 for funding for the Affordable Housing Society. It comes out of our Affordable Housing Fund. So, Director Seegers?
Thank you. We have a proposal coming forward in our 2020 budget.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Director Pratt?
I'm just wondering if we want to go maybe a little bit further as well, because that's the conference piece, but there's also this additional partnership piece as well as the additional, I was hearing other asks and reading through the report. Obviously the funding piece is different, but there is also the question of a letter of support, question of further conversation. So I'd like to put that out to the board if we'd like to do some more around that as well.
Director Seegers?
I don't know if it's been fleshed out sufficiently at this point. I'm not sure. That would be something I think that all the governments would want to be involved in. but what that looks like going forward, I think that at this point you're focusing on the funding and the housing and could potentially come back with the rest of it. I'm not sure. That'd be up to.
So something we've heard from all of the local governments is that we need to work on a strategic housing plan as well as the needs assessment. So we've stated to our current partners as well as the town of Gibson's that we are very interested and will absolutely support the local governments in that research and in that documentation. And what role our future staff would play in that would be up for discussion. What role our board could take as volunteers in that would also be up for discussion, but it is something that we do intend to partner with.
So a follow-up. Currently, the town of Gibson's has taken the lead on a housing needs assessment for the Sunshine Coast on behalf of all of the governments on the Sunshine Coast. And that is to be completed by May or June of next year, something like that?
That's correct. That's my understanding.
Yes. So if you're working with them, I think out of that will come what you can do with us and what the partnership could potentially look like going forward. I do know we want to partner with you and with the Workforce Housing Group, and I don't quite think that that's fleshed out because we don't know what our actual needs are at this point. Okay.
Director Hiltz?
Yeah, further what Chair Pratt is talking about, the idea though, my recollection is that the original funding came out of the rural or regional planning function. And so I'm wondering, there's grant and aid, and so what capacity does the regional district to support this kind of partnership? That's kind of what I'm not sure if that's where you're going about kind of. So I am interested to know, like, is there actually anything we can do as a regional district aside from creating a service within the existing services? So that's kind of what I'm trying to know, what existing services support this kind of partnership.
Yeah, we had discussed that at the yesterday when we did the agenda review, that there is no function or service for affordable housing with the regional district, and the idea perhaps of a grant and aid, but that could be also referred to staff if the board wishes to add that. Also refer to staff the idea of where could funding be developed from the regional district to support affordable housing. Is a motion to that effect? Yeah. Oh, Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Staff would take a look at the service possibilities in responding to the motion that was just passed. Should staff be directed to proceed in that way? Thanks.
And should staff be directed to do that? So that would require another motion to direct us. Sorry?
Sorry for being confusing with my language, Chair. Should the board
wish?
Should today's directive proceed to the board and be passed to staff for action? Staff, in responding to the question about possibilities to support a housing conference, would look at the service implications of that.
Okay.
And
that sounds good.
How the regional district might be able to bring resources that we have to bear on the issue.
Well, that's a question as well then. Should given the timing and given the budget, time of the budget coming up, does board wish to refer this to the board meeting this afternoon for the resolution? Yep.
I'll move that.
Thank you, Councilor McMahon, Director McMahon, Director Pratt. All in favor? Thank you. See if staff can catch up to us. Thank you. Thank you, Kayla, for your presentation, and look forward to hearing from you again.
Thanks very much.
Success in the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is Mr. Silas White on the Sunshine Coast Homeless Advisory Committee. I'm going to recuse myself from this conversation. What I'd like to do, though, Board, is to bring item 20 forward as well at this time. And item 20 was a recommendation that came out of the last board meeting. Because this is matters before Gibson's Council, support of housing, and we'll be doing a public hearing on this next week. It would be not appropriate for me to be present or to vote on this going forward. So, Director Seegers?
Sorry, were you talking about item 20?
I believe it's item 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's correct, yeah. Item 20, if they could bring that forward, item 3, and I'll ask that the Director Pratt take the chair. Thank you.
I'm going to start with asking for a motion to move number 20 up in the agenda directly after number 3. So moved. Second. All in favor? Motion carries. And Mr. White, the floor is yours.
Is that coming up? Do I need to do something here? So I'll just start by giving an introduction on the background on how this presentation came about. At the last committee meeting for the Sunshine Coast Homelessness Advisory Committee, there was some discussion about homelessness as a regional issue for the entire Sunshine Coast, and it was particularly Director Ties, as your liaison, was quite engaged in that conversation and raising it, and also Director Seegers was there as well, and there was a discussion around whether perhaps the SCRD should be looking at the supportive housing proposal for Gibsons as a real regional asset, as something that could have a regional impact on the entire Sunshine Coast, and also be looking at homelessness more broadly on a regular basis, similar to the affordable housing conversation that just took place. And of course, homelessness and affordable housing are closely associated. There is a separate committee for homelessness, in large part because of the history of it, which I'll get into here. I'll mention my role here too is that I got engaged in the advisory committee as a liaison from local government, much like Director Ties is and Director Seegers is for the District of Sechelt. And I think Director Seegers has been involved just as long as I have, so probably has just as much knowledge here, but I happen to be sitting in this seat. And I think I was asked to do this because the chair, Eleanor Molnar, happens to be away today, and I guess it's recognized I know my way to Field Road, so I was asked to come here. And I've seen this presentation before because it went to the town of Gibsons and when I was in attendance. So I've adjusted it a bit for the Sunshine Coast Regional District, and the SHAC, Sunshine Coast Homelessness Advisory Committee, has been active since 2007, and various government agencies and nonprofit agencies are all represented there, as well as a couple of community members involved in homelessness advocacy on the Sunshine Coast. So the liaisons from the local governments are there. Offices of the MLA and MP are usually present, and as well as these other listed agencies. Now, the history of the committee is it was a much more of a working committee when it started in being a place for volunteers to really make sure we had shelters on the Sunshine Coast, particularly in Sechelt, which evolved into the St. Hilda's shelter, and in Gibsons at the Salvation Army in the earlier days. And as we've seen in recent years, just in the last 4 years when I was in the committee, that committee quickly evolved because of homelessness exploding as such a severe issue on the Sunshine Coast that it couldn't be handled by volunteers anymore. It was just people were burning out. Even the volunteer hosts of, St. Hilda's was miraculous in hosting the shelter in Sechelt for so long, but it quickly, the capacity there could no longer sustain the need for services on the coast, and that is when the committee engaged first the Portland Hotel Society to help out, and then eventually Rain City came in 2015. And so this explosion, as we all know, it's closely associated with the last presentation, has been with the loss of affordable housing, rental stock, especially on the Sunshine Coast. And the Canadian Rental Housing Index has rated unaffordability on the coast as severe, and that was, we were highlighted in national news outlets and the Globe and Mail for that. And that was an assessment of the entire Sunshine Coast region. We're seeing the demographic is really changing from kind of the stereotype of homeless people who are often challenged with addictions and mental health issues, expanding to seniors and expanding to working people. There's more and more I hear about people who have full-time jobs but are living in vehicles or couch surfing or living in a shelter. And definitely seniors is a demographic that's increasing as well. And the Salvation Army just recently reported at SHAC last month that there are more and more seniors are finding themselves unable to rent. And the most reliable estimate, the estimate we tend to go back to is in 2016. There's a number of estimates that have happened. Gone on. Counts are really difficult. People often point to one that happened last year, which was 57 people on the whole Sunshine Coast, but that was a snapshot. It was very limited criteria. And it didn't, when I say the whole Sunshine Coast, it actually didn't count some areas like Pender Harbor wasn't included at all. And it was kind of a snapshot over a very short period of visible homelessness, whereas there's a lot of people who are not very visible that weren't counted by that. So we tend to rely on the 100 in 2016 is probably the best that SHAC has been able to come up with. And of course, we know that over the last 3 years, there's many more people have become homeless, and that's shown through the demand for supportive housing, which 40 units quickly filled in Sechelt when the high tide opened, and soon after that, the 20 beds in the shelter. Some people from the shelter were able to move to supportive housing, but then their places in the shelter were also filled. And there are currently at the proposed supportive housing facility in Gibsons, there are over 40 people already on the application list between BC Housing and Rain City collecting forms. Seniors and women make up a large number of hidden homeless on the Sunshine Coast, as community services has done a lot of studies on that recently. Shelter-wise, there is a temporary shelter in Gibsons in addition to the full-time upper deck shelter, which is run by Rain City in Sechelt. But it's always up for temporary funding. It hasn't been confirmed this year. It's usually about 7 to 15, I think, is more. There were up to 15 people using it last year, and it was basically up to 10 to 15 on a regular basis in 2019. Here's some data on supportive housing. The concept is it is more high density housing, so it's appropriate in the municipal areas of the Sunshine Coast, even though there could be people from all over the Sunshine Coast who use it. I understand there are people who are living in the Forest and Roberts Creek currently who are on the application list for the Gibson supportive housing proposal, as well as other locations around outside of central Gibsons. There are on-site services, including food for the tenants, and on-site staffing, and also it's a central place for other services like Vancouver Coastal Health, mental health and addictions, different community services, outreach, different services to be able to access people, our residents who are most in need, which is a great assistance rather than trying to be dispersed all the way around the Sunshine Coast. And Vancouver Coastal Health submitted some information for this proposal too when it was made in Gibson's. There's just some strong support here. Coastal Health, as well as other community agencies, strongly support the proposed supportive housing in Gibson's for these reasons that are listed above. The Gibson's Fire Department strongly supports the location and proposal in Gibson's, largely because of the fire risk of having people dispersed all over the woods on the Sunshine Coast, and it's a huge concern to the fire department, and I understand that was a reason for the Sechelt Nation cutting down some trees very visibly in Sechelt recently. And housing first is a philosophy behind supportive housing, in that get people housed first, and there's a lot of research behind this, and then they have the opportunity and ability to deal with health issues, employment issues of reconnecting with family, and really I think if we all think about it, if you were struggling to find housing in a place, a roof above your head every single day, that would make it very, very difficult to deal with any other issues you'd be experiencing, and definitely make them worse. So that's been supported by research, and is a big reason why the BC government is pushing supportive housing, and has recently released research supporting how successful supportive housing has been in where it's opened up in areas around BC the last couple of years, and that research is available on the BC Housing website and has been highlighted in the Coast Reporter and other publications recently. Outreach. So the outreach this is a slide specific to the SCRD, because much of the support for people who might be intense in the woods, for example, is through outreach, which BC Housing funds an outreach worker with Rain City. It's a 1.0 right now, and that person has far too much work to do for those hours. Much of the work actually takes place in Sechelt and Gibson's, because there are many homeless people there who aren't housed in high tide or in the shelter, and they have needs. They have needs to be connected to health services and other services, and the outreach worker ensures that say people camping in the woods have supplies and a tent that'll keep them dry, things like that. So that's an essential service, and it's unlikely, even though it's definitely needed expansion of outreach services. It's unlikely BC Housing will support that until supportive housing is in place in Gibson's, and then they'll probably have another look at what impact that makes, and what needs there are outside of that facility and high tide facility for outreach on the coast. And Rain City has definitely suggested that's a place where the SCRD should be monitoring, and perhaps exercising some advocacy when and if it's clearly identified that more outreach is needed here. And then just following up, there's a quote here and some information about the need for an interest in affordable housing and homelessness on the Sunshine Coast. Eleonora included a quote from U.S. Vice President Humphrey, which is the moral test of government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of life, the elderly, those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped. And I certainly found in my experience as a local government official that over 4 years, it took a while, but it's really important to make sure that the voices that aren't heard in the letters that we constantly receive, and the people who tend to are able to make it to public hearings, are able to sit in front of you like I am today, that those are the voices you tend to be inundated with, but over time, it's elected officials are really obliged to expand your horizons, to realize that those most in need need to be served as well, and perhaps even more attention needs to be paid to those voices to make sure that they're reflected in the decisions you make. And I understand that it was also raised at the committee that by Director Ties that perhaps the SCRD should consider some support for the supportive housing proposal in writing to the town of Gibsons. So that's I understand. I'll officially ask for that support on behalf of the committee here too. And I understand. I think that's on your agenda. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And I'm open to any questions.
Great. Thank you, Silas. I'm going to open it up to the committee to see if you have any questions or comments for our presenter. Director McMahon.
I just want to say that this definitely is a problem in the rural areas as well as the municipalities. I was contacted last week, or actually earlier this week, by a resident, because a property in my area is being redeveloped, and a bunch of people who have been living at the back of it in the woods with no running water and no electricity for the last 20 or 30 years are suddenly without any place to go, and of course they have no resources, none at all, and they're mostly seniors. So it's a big issue. And so I do feel that the rural areas should support the affordable housing initiatives in the municipalities, because we are never going to build the shelters in the rural areas. It doesn't make any sense. But our citizens will be served by these services.
Yeah, I'll just mention that the affordability crisis on the Sunshine Coast is dispersing people everywhere and in different directions. There are people who might normally live in Sechelt or Gibsons who find a property on Roberts Creek, for example. I knew people personally who were doing this in the last year, and where they're able to live in sheds or in tents there, but then they come back to Gibsons or Sechelt to work or to kind of engage with their normal social group, and then it goes the other way too, where people are displaced in the rural areas and end up at the shelter in Sechelt or in Gibsons.
I have Director Hiltz and then Director Howard.
Thanks. So the question was, you're asking for a letter of support from the regional district specifically into the public hearing process, or a letter of support through housing in reference to that? So I'm just kind of...
No. That came as a surprise to me when I showed up today. But I understand there's already a motion. Is that correct?
There's we had this on our September 19th committee agenda at CAS. We were going to discuss it there, but then because of the changing of because the original hearing was supposed to be this week, so we wanted to make sure we had it on agenda, so we actually pushed it to this meeting so we could have the conversation. So there hasn't, the only motion we had was to refer to the discussion, which is number 20 on our list, which will be directly after this.
Okay, so
Yeah.
my understanding was Director Ties was preparing a motion in support of the actual supportive housing proposal in Gibsons, in recognition of its regional impact and its impact as a regional issue, and that's the committee definitely supports that. Yeah.
So just making, it's not necessarily a letter to the public hearing, but a letter from the regional district can be a government-to-government letter, something like this. This is kind of...
I think at this stage of the process in Gibsons, that would be considered part of the public process for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Director Howard?
Thank you. I wanted to begin by expressing my appreciation for the work that you and the other volunteers in your committee are doing. And I'm glad that Ms. Feenstra is still in the room because I want to extend that appreciation to you and your group as well. Homelessness and lack of affordable housing is approaching a crisis level on the coast, and I think we're all appreciative of the work that you're doing to step forward to address it. I wanted to express my support, along with Director McMahon, for a letter of support for this proposal. Andreas provided me with some draft language. I won't move the motion now, however, because I think there may be a little thought required as to the intergovernmental aspect of this letter, and there are more experienced minds at this table who can speak to that. So perhaps file that away that I may have a motion to propose shortly.
Okay, and that'll be in the next item on our agenda, so where we can discuss that. Any further questions or comments for Mr. White and on behalf of SHAC? One thing I will say is I attended the Pender Harbour and Egmont community meeting on Sunday in support of Director Lee, and it came up there, and I about the concerns of homelessness in their community and substandard housing within Pender Harbour and Egmont. It is a problem across the coast, and I'll tell you from my professional life as a real estate agent, we see a lot of it. We see the unaffordability, see a lot of even real estate deals for first-time homeowners just fall through the cracks because of the mortgage rules and just not being able to qualify for for just even the lowest level of entrance into the market. And the housing stock here we need to look at more. And it's certainly it all feeds together. So yes, you.
Yeah. On Pender Harbour, I just spoke to Rain City, and there's definitely a recognition that outreach position is not getting out to Pender Harbour as much as Rain City would like, because there's just so much to do in the municipal areas. And the hope is definitely that should supportive housing be expanded in Gibsons, and that outreach worker would be able to expand more to the rural areas. And there is definitely an understanding that there are people in the northern area of the coast living in derelict boats and vehicles, and that's increasing. And secondly, it's worth mentioning that there's a lot of pressure on Sechelt right now. I think we're seeing that in the news. It was acknowledged by the RCMP that supportive housing is definitely, at our last meeting, is part of the solution. There isn't a lot of concern about kind of the visible drug use and crime that's taking place, that's being reported in Sechelt, being caused from the supportive housing. It's actually been helping people to get away from that lifestyle, as recognized by the RCMP and other agencies, whereas there are a lot of people, other people around who need to be housed as well.
Okay. I'm going to look to the directors again for any further questions. Okay. Seeing none, thank you very much for your presentation, Silas, and for your continued work on the Homelessness Advisory Committee. So with that, we are going to move to number 20 on our agenda, which is the supporting housing project at the former Gibsons RCMP station. This is recommendation number 14 from our Corporate and Admin Services Committee from September 19th to bring this conversation forward to this meeting. The public hearing for the supportive housing site in Gibsons has been scheduled for October 17th. So I'm going to look to the directors to see what I've heard a couple of ideas for motions and thoughts going forward. So, directors, where would you like to start? I'm seeing Director Seegers move towards her mic. No? Okay. You're going to go over? Okay. Director Howard?
I'll predicate this by saying I have the least familiarity with the process of this body, of everybody here. So, but I would like to propose a motion that the SCRD prepare a letter of support for the proposed supporting housing project in Gibsons. The language I've been provided goes on to say, and that the recommendation be brought to the board meeting this afternoon. If that is an appropriate, I'm getting nods on that, then that language would also be included in the motion.
That is a very appropriate motion to make. And do I see a seconder? Seconder? Okay. Any discussion on the motion on the floor? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'd be interested in having our strategic plan tied in with that motion. 5.8 is our housing advocacy point. So if we're to, because that's, I think, the point of view that we're coming from is the housing advocacy. So I'd be interested in having that as part of the motion.
All right. Director McMahon?
I'm not sure if that needs to be part of the motion or it should be part of the letter, the content of the letter, speaking to our strategic priorities and how they align with this project.
And I can certainly, as I write the letter, can certainly reference our strategic plan and advocacy in there. Okay. Any further comments to the motion on the floor or questions? Any further discussion at all? Oh, certainly. Autumn?
That the SCRD prepare a letter of support for the proposed supportive housing project in the town of Gibsons, and that the recommendation be forwarded to the October 10th, 2019 regular board meeting. That the SCRD prepare a letter of support for the proposed supportive housing project in the town of Gibsons.
Can we maybe do an amendment to make that a little bit more firm? Because it says prepare a letter, it should be send a letter, maybe. It's not definitive enough. Okay, so that would be to send a letter. So may I have a motion to amend? So moved, seconded. You have no. No. You can second you can second the amendment. That's fine. Any comments on the amendment? I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Okay. Motion carries on the amendment. So the amended motion reads that the SCRD send a letter and it be forwarded to the board this afternoon. Any further comments on the amended motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion carries. Any further discussion on this item, or should we just leave Bill out in the hall? Are you getting Bill? Okay, thank you, Silas. Okay, we're good. All right, so that's number 20 on the agenda. Perfect. We can either just take a minute break, or I can just continue on without Bill. Okay, here he comes. Okay, so we are starting on Annex B. I'll make a motion to, if we can make a motion to receive all the reports, please. So moved, seconded. All those in favor? Motion carries. And with that, I will officially send it over to the official chair of the committee.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. We're now on to item 4. And just to let the board know and the audience know, we will take a break at around 11 o'clock, just in case you're anticipating. So the next item for the senior planner is the application for a subdivision for the Agricultural Land Reserve, application ALR 000111, Annex B in your agenda, and this is rural planning voting only. So turn it over to the senior planner, or Mr. Patey, or Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I'd be pleased to introduce this one. So the SCRD received a referral from the Agricultural Land Commission regarding a 3-lot subdivision application within the Agricultural Land Reserve as part of Phase 2 of the Elphinstone Crossing Estate development in West Howe Sound. The ALC is looking for a response from the SCRD with respect to this application. As noted in the report, the proposed subdivision within the ALR will create a variety of lot sizes suitable for agricultural uses. The proposal complies with the OCP, zoning bylaw, and a number of relevant strategic documents of the SCRD. And also, as noted in the report, the SCRD supported a previous proposal for a 5-lot subdivision on these lands, which was subsequently refused by the ALC. And the current proposal of a 3-lot subdivision does not differ significantly from the SCRD's perspectives at that time. The new proposal includes larger lot sizes and home plates, which are 0.5 acres or 2,000 square meters, not hectares as noted on page 10 of the agenda, so apologies for the typo, for restricted residential use that can help to address Agricultural Land Commission concerns. And so staff recommends supporting the current application for subdivision in the ALR. And 2 further notes, although not related to the subdivision referral from the ALC, staff share that for context, trail connections and a covenanted creation of a picnic area were dealt with during a 2018 rezoning of a portion of the Elphinstone Crossing lands. And those help address the recreation and access provisions in the OCP policies. And finally, when the prior referral with the previous version of the subdivision plan was brought to the committee, the recommendation included a clause stating support was conditional on a covenant being secured against further subdivision of lots 12 and 13. And that, as noted at the time, that was a recommendation from the Area Advisory Planning Commission. And so consideration could be given that that clause be added again to the recommendations presented here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I'll turn first to Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair Beamish, and thanks, staff, for that update on the report. And I would be that inclusion of the former covenant. Did that text go across, or does that need to go to the staff?
Mr. Hall?
So to assist the committee, the wording that was used in the prior staff report for the previous subdivision application was that the ALR 00011 is the current application number. Application for subdivision be supported on the condition that a covenant be secured against further subdivision of lots 12 and 13 as part of the subdivision approval process.
Director Hiltz?
So I'm seeing the applicant in the audience. So is this new information to the applicant, or I'm just wondering?
No, it's not. That's basically my understanding, and I'm supportive of that. Basically, I'm not proposing what was previously proposed as 5 lots. Now it's 3 lots, and my updated proposal. And that to go ahead and also include the condition of no further subdivision being allowed, I think is in keeping with the spirit that I have. Okay. We're trying to make 3 farm-centric lots here.
Okay, that's clarification. Then the last piece that I seek from staff is I've been referring to the attachment C, the current proposal. So I've been looking for where the trail, this section, this is a key parcel of land in West Howe Sound 1354, and there isn't really another public access to the slopes of Mount Elphinstone from Sprott Kids out for about almost a 6-kilometer stretch. So this is kind of an important piece of the access to Mount Elphinstone. So I didn't see it in that proposal. So is that going to be coming through Moti subdivision process, that location will be defined? Or I'm just looking.
Basically, that trail that goes to the across the northern portion of our district lot. So we have a built road that ends in that cul-de-sac, and then there's the road right away extending to the northern property line. That is unbuilt from a road perspective, but I'd be basically putting in a hikeable trail along there, and that would then connect with the neighboring District 5. And there is a pretty extensive logging road in the neighboring District 5 that leads up nicely along the flanks of Mount Elphinstone, and this would provide that tie to that. At Langdale RV Park, right across from there, there is a logging road that gets up to the logging lands above on the flanks of Mount Elphinstone. That is, I think, a very good hikeable trail that I and others use. What my proposal here is for us to provide a hiking path that would get from the end of our built roadway across the remainder of our lands and then tie into neighboring District lot that easily gets you over to that logging road.
Director Hills?
So a process question for staff in terms of the details of what the applicant is telling and how that comes into a map that we can actually see the success. And I'm wondering if has the trails people looked at this, have parks people looked at that in terms of the accessibility. That's kind of the piece that I'm trying to understand.
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. The negotiation of community amenity was undertaken as part of the subdivision, and a covenant is registered on title that secures the picnic area and trail. In terms of connectivity and trail network planning, I'm sorry I don't have information about the process that was undertaken at that time. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Beamish. Yeah, so it is a significant issue to. I was under the OCP that these lands have an access, and I'm not an expert on the connectivity here, so I'm wondering if there's something in here, particularly with respect to the subdivision application that is ongoing with Moti. So is that another venue? I wouldn't want to lose this opportunity to not have a connecting piece to Mount Elphinstone, because this is essentially a forever kind of decision. So,
I guess the question, Mr. Hall, are we talking two different processes here? This one's the ALR. Is there a further process that will come forward with Moti?
Thank you for the question, Chair. The Ministry of Transportation would be the approver for the subdivision. Staff, if the committee would like further information about trail connections in the area, a directive to bring back further information could be provided. The scope of the application at this time is just the Agricultural Land Commission's referral respecting agricultural land. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. It sounds like the question is, if there's going to be a covenant registered to ensure that the path is put in, is that a process that goes to the regional district, or is that something that the province would do through Moti? And if we do, if it does lie here, where inside the process does that actually happen?
Mr. Hall?
Thank you for the question. That's an excellent question. And I apologize. I don't feel that staff have the answer to that question at this time. The scope of analysis that was undertaken here primarily relates to the Agricultural Land Commission question. And so either if the committee would like more information prior to making a decision on this referral, staff can follow up prior and this could be deferred, or staff can bring back information to be applied to a different process. Thank you.
If we're going to have the proponent speak further, could you actually come to the microphone, please, so we can actually record your words? Thank you. And for the record, state your name, please.
My name is Tim Rockford. Yeah, so regarding this recreational trail or walking trail that I had proposed, I discussed that in detail with the SCRD planner, Yulee, during our first phase, including providing documentation of what I was specifically proposing. He was comfortable with that. I think that information is already readily available, and I was simply planning on continuing on with that. The trail that I would construct, basic decent walking trail along there, along that unbuilt road right-of-way that I'm planning on putting to our northern property line. I would build that portion. There's still a portion in the neighboring district lot. What I would build is the portion on my property. That would provide that interconnect. It would have to be finished off on the neighboring, well, you can actually walk it. I've walked it myself on the neighboring district lot. That also is unbuilt road right-of-way. But just for clarity, there is an existing logging road that goes up from Port Mellon Highway, just across from Langdale RV Park, that leads right up into, it's a logging road, that leads right up into the flanks of Mount Elphinstone, and that goes over along, first of all, it provides access along the hydro right-of-way, and from that you can get over to Sprocket Kids. So it's a very good walking trail. I do a lot myself, and what this would just provide would be another interconnect path to lead over to that. Is that clear, or is there any questions that the directors have?
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I think what we're looking for is you're going to build it, but how ongoingly do we ensure that it actually stays in place? And that's what they're talking about, the covenant, where there would be a covenant. So you're going to have people who live beside that. I mean, we see it in Sechelt, we see it in Gibsons, we see it everywhere, where people eventually encroach on that.
Mm-hmm.
How is that actually protected in time is what we're looking at.
Yep.
And so we're going to request probably that staff look at a covenant or some such manner to ensure that the regional district can ensure that that is open
Sure.
for perpetuity.
And one question in this regard, honestly, the whole ALR piece of our property, it's been stuck in this loop, not because of the SCRD. Honestly, as I've been trying to work through things with the ALC, I would respectfully request that, because I also have another overall subdivision that is not in our ALR lands, I'm committed to doing this, and I will do it and have it covenanted appropriately. But I do feel this sense of need to move forward on the ALR portion, given how long it's been languishing. And so if you could make a ruling on our ALR subdivision piece today, I would greatly appreciate that. And then if you want to put this condition, you can also attach it with our overall subdivision proposal, including our non-ALR lands. And I'm happy to do whatever is required to get that in place. But I want to just try to move forward, because the hang-up here is with the ALC, and I really just need to complete the SCRD portion at this time if possible. So I would respectfully request that of the SCRD board.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
I understand the want to move it forward. For me as a director, I don't feel like I have enough information from our staff, I'm taking my information from staff in a written report that's produced in the public domain that we can see. And so my obligation is to the public is to follow the OCP, which is that this parcel of 1354 shall be considered access to Mount Elphinstone. So that's what I'm looking for, is assurances. So I think staff will have to go back, find those documents, that process was actually followed. So that's my motion would be to refer it back to staff to make sure that all these pieces are in place. And I do understand, this application for subdivision has been going on since 2007 in various forms, and this one, these are forever decisions. This is a 60 or 100-year decision, so if it takes another month to do it, that's where I'm going to be with.
That's fine. They do exist. That documentation does exist, so.
Go first to, Mr. Hall, if you're going to respond to. No, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, if it gives the committee and the applicant comfort, staff concur that this information exists and staff can provide it in short order to keep the process moving. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Seegers.
Thank you. I understand Director Hilt's concerns, and I think we're actually looking at two separate processes here. Yeah. One is ALC support for the subdivision, just actually having it move forward. The other is the development that will reside at the regional district. And the covenant piece that he's looking for would actually be more appropriate to be addressed in that process. So it could be that it could be done in two separate pieces. One, yes, support the ALC and the AL, the Agricultural Land Reserve process, but then make another motion that in moving the development forward, we want to see that a covenant be put in place so that staff have that direction to ensure that it's dealt with at the time it needs to be. That has nothing to do with the Agricultural Land Reserve piece. Right? They're two separate processes.
Director Hiltz, response?
Well, it is a phased approach, so there is a accumulation that the original subdivision, which was in 2007, wasn't there when the OCP, which came in 2011, which said that this is when we need these trails. So there is some tying together, and I'd like to see that the subdivisions on the western portion, which we were talking about, isn't actually covered off. So I'm as respectful as I am to the applicant might be less inclined to agree with. We are holding the conditional support. So I admit that's my intention is to motivate, perhaps, to make sure that this.
You already have my full motivation and commitment.
Right, and I just need it on a piece of paper, right? And that's where I'm going to staff that's where I really need that piece of paper.
So, Director Hiltz, you did make a motion, we did not.
So the motion would be refer to staff for more information regarding the connectivity of the western portion and this ALR application.
And do we see a seconder for that? Seconded. Further discussion? Director McMahon?
I would like to understand this process better, too. And sorry about there's a lot of issues right now in Area E around connectivity for pedestrians and, where possible, cyclists. And I want to be very clear in understanding the process that we can get that established so that we don't end up with neighborhoods where, things are blocked off. And so I will support this motion.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. Just a question for staff. Is there a time frame by which they're looking for a response, or is it just when we get back to them?
Mr. Hall?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff don't believe there is a stated deadline for response. Thank you.
Okay. See no further hands raised. This is a matter for voting by A, B, D, E, and F. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? See none. So just turn it off. It has been referred back to staff and will come forward again at a future Plan and Development Committee meeting. Director Pratt?
Just a comment, or actually a question to staff. Under the heading of edge planning, as we go down onto the top of page 12, the last sentence in that paragraph, alternatively, the ALC MOTI could require, it appears to be an unfinished sentence.
Mr. Hall?
Thank you to the Director for pointing that out. I apologize that without the report author here, I feel uncomfortable speculating on what the end of that sentence might have been.
You now have the opportunity to finish that sentence. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, and you have to deal with this coming forward on a future agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, well, move to receive, and then the other recommendation will come forward. This will all be referred back to staff for details, yeah, for further information, yeah. Okay, Director McMahon?
Yeah, I had comments to make on subdivision in areas like this and some of the considerations around ALR. Now, since we're moving this forward to another meeting, would it be more appropriate to make those comments later and just move through our agenda, or how do we want to do this?
It might be more appropriate if you have, do you have written comments, or do you have just a statement to make at this time, or do you want to put this into new business? Not new business, okay.
I just wanted to express my long-standing concerns about subdivisions proposals in areas where there is no water service, no garbage pickup, no fire protection, and no prospect of ever having transit. I realize that this was approved a long time ago, and we don't necessarily completely want to change direction in the middle of a project, but I have a lot of concerns about this kind of development when we have no land use plan, no regional growth strategy, and no identified buffer zone between residential land use and industrial land use. I'm also concerned about the statement that these parcels will be used for agricultural purposes. We don't control the use of land by the people that buy it. Most of the ALR land in Area E is not currently being used by farm purposes. Increasingly, it's being used for estate housing. You know, if we approve things on the excuse that it's going to be for agriculture, do we go back and check later to find out if it's really used for agriculture? Block 1312 in Roberts Creek, the 2015 subdivision was approved on the basis of development for small farms. Well, there aren't any small farms there at this point. One of the biggest barriers to agriculture on the Sunshine Coast is the small size of the parcels that make them uneconomical to farm. And so further subdividing the very few large parcels that we have does not necessarily make sense. It may make it less likely that they'll be farmed. Now, in this particular case, this is not what you would call prime farmland. The only thing that's been growing on it previously is trees, and what's going to be growing on it now is views. So I have issues with the rationales that are being brought forward for subdividing ALR land.
Thank you, Director McMahon. Director Seegers.
Thank you. While it's generally believed that you need a large parcel of land to have a viable farm, I have to say there's a very good example in downtown Sechelt where they have half an acre and they produce so much produce. They have a overflowing booth in the farmers market regularly and are making a living from that piece of property. So it's not necessarily the size of the property that determines whether or not it's a viable farming endeavor. And are people here actually farming? We don't have a say on what they do with their land. So,
Director McMahon.
If our intent is to encourage farming, then we should look at whether the strategies that we are using are successful or not. I'm basing my comments on the agricultural plan, which identified small lot size as being an issue and being uneconomical, and also based on discussions I've had with farmers on the coast about the difficulties of successfully farming small parcels.
Seeing no further discussion, we will move on to Annex C, item number 5 on the agenda. And this is the application for exclusion from and inclusion into the agricultural land reserve for the Morgan property in the ALC application 58605. And again, this is rural planning. And I'll turn firstly to Director Hiltz. Oh, sorry, no, I will turn to Mr. Hall firstly. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. This is a follow-up report providing more information about a referral, which was considered by the committee in July, from the Agricultural Land Commission for an application to exchange lands in and out of the Agricultural Land Reserve. Staff are able to provide further information provided by the ALC to assist with the board's consideration of this referral. Specific new information to note is that the ALC indicates they were unable to make a definitive determination of the location and size of the non-ALR portion of land within the subject parcel at the current time, and confirmed that a final determination will be made during their formal review process of the application. Buildings on the parcel currently are a rancher of 2,150 square feet with an attached garage, 600 square feet, and a nursery of 3,000 square feet. Current agricultural uses on the parcel are berry farm and keeping of horses, and there's an irrigation pond with numerous drainage ditches and approximately 10 acres of pasture land for horses. The intent of the application is to improve land use of the farm and reduce conflict with non-farm uses. The proposal is consistent with the West Howe Sound OCP and the zoning bylaw. Subject to verification of the location, size, and agricultural capability of the lands for exchange, the proposal may result in no net loss of agricultural land. The application deals with the land exchange, and the SCRD is asked to provide a recommendation to the ALC on this aspect of the referral. Any potential future development of the land would be reviewed through an applicable planning application, and the community would have an opportunity to give input through that process. Staff recommends supporting this application conditional upon the ALC verifying the location, size, and agricultural capability of the lands proposed for exchange. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Now to Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair Beamish, and thanks to staff for going back and looking at those details. I guess a bit of preface is that agricultural land, the highest and best use of agricultural land is agriculture, and it is true that the Sunshine Coast is a challenging place with very highly variable land, and so that's the premise that I'm coming from. Agricultural land is the highest and best use. And so in reviewing the ALC application requirements and what the local government's review is, there's two sort of steps to the question. There's one to authorize the application to go on, and then the other is to provide a recommendation. And so I've printed off a piece of paper, and then the chair has this, and so the recommendation that I would be suggesting is to, after the be received, that is being struck, and that the recommendation would read, and that the board authorize the ALC application 58605 to proceed to the Agricultural Land Commission, and advise that the board is not in a position to provide a recommendation to approve the application. And so that's the two step. To move it on, the applicant wants an answer for this, and only the ALC can provide these answers. The answers in terms of the location and size of the property, the land capability of the property. There is no current agrologist report on it. And so the question I have, is this application in the benefit of agriculture? The applicant's intent is to move the excluded area to a corner and then subdivide off. So that is the applicant's intent, which is in his application, and he provided that information as a delegation to the board. So I think that this, from my point of view, moves the application on, but I do not feel comfortable making a recommendation about the value of this action with regards to agricultural land. So that is the recommendation that I would like to move.
So you're suggesting that the recommendations that are contained on page 16 not be dealt with, in fact, that you substitute your recommendation that you've proposed?
Yes, following the first one, which is that the report be received.
Received. So that, just to be clear again, I have a copy in front of me that it is that, and that the board authorize ALC application 58605 to proceed to the Agricultural Land Commission and advise that the board is not in a position to provide a recommendation to approve the application. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Second by Director McMahon. Discussion. Director Lee.
I'm trying to understand that if we say we are not in a position to approve, does that mean we do not approve?
Director Hills.
There's where the essential authority lies is the authorization to proceed. The ALC, the applicant fills in the form, it comes to the local government, it goes through a local government approval, which we're in, and it's up to the local government whether they authorize to proceed it back to the ALC. The second portion is whether you put in a recommendation to support the application. So you can support, not support, but the main thing is you have to authorize or not authorize. If we choose to not authorize, the application would die here, and I think it's about $1,000 or $1,200 would be refunded to the applicant, because most of the cost, from my understanding of the application, is charged through to the ALC. There's only a small portion that comes to the regional district. So two steps: authorization to proceed. Recommendation is do you support or not support, or no, have no recommendation, and that's the idea of the two-step process.
We'll go to Mr. Hill. Is that Mr. Hall?
I'm doing so good.
Only a couple more months. Is that your understanding?
Thank you for the question, Chair. The Director's statement of the process sounds accurate to staff.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Can I hear that last line again then?
And that the board, I'll read the whole thing, and that the board authorize ALC application 58605 to proceed to the Agricultural Land Commission and advise that the board is not in a position to provide a recommendation to approve the application. Director McMahon?
I will admit to being confused. It sounds a bit like we're trying to have our cake and eat it too, but it is difficult, because it is difficult to understand the agricultural implications. It's also difficult to support the application given the concerns of the neighbors. And that gets us into other grounds too, because there's been a lot of concerns on the part of the neighbors that there may be other motivations for the application, but we can't speak to motivations that we know nothing about. So that would be inappropriate. But the fact that the neighbors are very concerned is something that we should pay attention to. Whether their concerns are well-founded or not, I'm not in a position to say. But when neighbors strongly oppose an application, it seems to me that we should listen.
Director Hills.
So kind of to summarize, for me there is more unknowns about the agricultural aspects, which can only be answered by moving it onto the ALC. That's kind of why I think it needs to move to the ALC, but they're ultimately the place where the mapping data will be determined, the current agricultural uses will be determined, whether this is a benefit to the agricultural utility. That's ultimately, we're not agricultural. I'm not an agricultural expert. And so that data is lacking, and that data rests with the ALC, and the applicant and staff confirm that the ALC is the only place to get this. So that's why this seems to be, for me, a balance of the various interests between the private interest and the public interest.
See no more further speakers. Again, this is rural planning. All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, it's approved. Thank you. And that was approved, was the motion put forward by Director Hiltz. I see it's 5 minutes to 11 now. I'm going to propose we take our break now, because I believe there'll be further discussion on the next issue as well, sort of thing. So 5-minute break, everybody. Thank you. Providing to staff copies of his proposed resolutions in writing. That's a good practice. It saves us trying to make them up as we go, and it's very helpful. So thank you, Mr. Hill, Director Hiltz, for that. Moving now to Annex D, item 6 on your agenda, and this is, again, rural planning. And this is the development variance permit, DVP 00043. And this is, go back to Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. This report is a follow-up to the item on September's agenda respecting setback variance at 1281 Marine Drive. More information from the Ministry of Transportation was received, indicating that the Ministry will likely widen the roadway at Marine Drive in the future, but has no plans for a bike path in this area. When the road is widened, the Ministry states the hedge will need to be removed and drainage will need to be added at this location. And for the proposed retaining wall, a setback permit will be required from the Ministry, and the Ministry's review will determine whether or not the retaining wall interferes with the safe and efficient operation of traffic on Marine Drive. And the term bike path, as used in the Ministry's comments, generally refers to a separated facility, so separated from the road. The Ministry did not indicate definite interference between the reduced setback or wall and the road widening, or anticipated future road widening, which staff believe could enable on-road active transportation improvements. Staff recommend issuing the variance permit subject to the applicants obtaining a setback permit from the Ministry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I'm going to go to Director Hiltz first.
Thanks, Chair Beamish, and thanks for the board and the attendees. That Area F took a bit of a chunk out of the agenda here, so thanks for that. So further to the report, so what the report revealed is that Highways is unaware of the intention of a transportation corridor network bike path shoulder thing to get people from one place to another, and that the screening is Highways, so that and that Highways relies upon engineering standards which don't really have an aesthetic to them. So the idea of the wall and the retaining wall will be left up to the applicants and their design people. There's nothing to compel the applicant to provide screening of a wall, and so that would be up to the goodwill of the applicant to facilitate something like that. So what we can do, and I would like to add something to the recommendations, and this is kind of on the advocacy piece, so it's an advise piece. If I'll read it out, if that's all right. So it would follow probably either a number 3 or it would be an and. It's a and advise Modi that Marine Drive is a priority for accessible shoulders as part of an active transportation network, as noted in the West Howe Sound Official Community Plan Bylaw 640/2009, Transportation Policy 9.3.8, and to quote that, the Regional District shall work with MOT to encourage the development of cycling and walking routes along roads for transportation and recreational purposes, subject to the detailed feasibility studies, with routes composed of separate pathways where possible and a 2-meter shoulder elsewhere, with Marine Drive being a priority. So that's the end of the recommendation. So that's, I guess, our advocacy piece to that MOTI needs to know that we have an intent through our trail network plan, the official community plan, to have Marine Drive as a accessible corridor. So that would be, and I would move the other recommendations as a package. So
you move the recommendation number 2, and then you add this as an additional recommendation.
Yeah, it's an advise statement, and advise.
Do you have a seconder for that? Okay, discussion? You want to see that? Director Lee?
Just clarification for me. I believe the road will still be a standard 66 foot, and that the opportunity to put a bike and walking path on the side, and in fact on both sides, would still exist after the wall went up. I just wanted to be sure that I had that correct.
Director Hiltz, can you respond?
I can respond in that I did. You can go on to the mapping applications, and it's Marine Drive was I think subdivided or provided at a time when 66-foot right-of-ways were not necessarily the 100%. So I think in this part there might be actually 55, and then it goes 60, and then over here it might be 48, and then there's a jog out here, and there's an encroachment here. It's on an inside sloping corner on a hillside. So that's the main issue is from an engineering point of view. If you start to do this kind of work and now you start to do other work, does one preclude the other one from happening? So the first step is for them to know that, MOTI to know that there is an intent to have what they're called in the active transportation design guidelines are accessible shoulders is what they're calling, and GM Hall referred to that. It's not so much as an accessible path, they're called accessible shoulders, which is something which is in the design guidelines, which just came out in 2019, September or August. They're recent there, so just to help them see that this is the intent. So it isn't a perfect 66.
Director Howard?
Pardon me if I have not picked up this fact from the staff presentation thus far, but I would appreciate clarification from staff as to whether, if this development variance is approved, will the location of the retaining wall as sought preclude the construction and maintenance of a shoulder adjacent to the lane of travel on Marine Drive?
Director Hall?
He's a director now.
General Manager.
Thank you, Chair. I usually get promoted at least once a meeting, very briefly. Thank you for the question. So it's staff's understanding, based on the information provided by the Ministry of Transportation, that the Ministry has not at this time identified that the construction of a retaining wall in this location would preclude the widening of the roadway, which staff understand could include an accessible shoulder. And further, through a future process step, which is the review of a setback permit that the Ministry would undertake, and which is a condition identified by staff for approval of a development variance permit, the Ministry may give further consideration to that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Is that satisfactory? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, Director Hiltz?
Yeah, in terms of Director Howard, yeah, it's the engineers will tell us in the future through that process whether this is if it precludes it. So the process kicks it to MOTI, they decide and they look at it. So yeah, it seems to be outside of our ability as a regional district to influence.
And I'm sorry, Director Hiltz, you did move the recommendations. Were they seconded? Okay, seconded. Okay. So again, further discussion. Any further? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you very much. And just for clarification, it's not all old age up here. In the town of Gibsons, our managers are called directors. So I do that occasionally. Thank you. Moving next to Annex E, and that's item 7 on the agenda, and this is the Advisory Committee comments on BCTS 2019-23 operational plans. Again, a rural planning issue, and Julie Clark, planner. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. This item is a follow-up to an item from June 27th, 2019. BC Timber Sales refers their 5-year operating plans to SCRD each year. In turn, SCRD refers to our advisory committees. In June this year, the board received a report with staff's analysis on BC Timber Sales 2019 to 2023 referral. SCRD referred operations to all 5 advisory planning commissions and the Natural Resources Advisory Committee. The minutes from each meeting that pertain to the referral are compiled in your attachment A. The purpose of this report is to provide a summary of advisory committee comments to the board for information in advance of sending advisory committee comments to BCTS as per the resolution from June the 27th. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion, again, we're planning, voting on this, but discussion on this? Seeing no discussion, there are recommendations. Someone would like to move the recommendations. Director McMahon, Director Hiltz, all in favor? Thank you. Thank you very much. Next item, Annex F. Item 8 on the agenda, Bargain Bay License 241194 renewal, and Rebecca Port, Parks Planning Coordinator. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. In 1989, SCRD acquired the Crown Land License for a 2.2 hectare site located off Francis Peninsula Road in Electoral Area A. This area includes land and water within Bargain Bay. The infrastructure within the license area includes a rock stairway leading to a beach. There is community interest throughout the Sunshine Coast to maintain and enhance opportunities for access to the water. This particular access requires no specific improvements outside of regular maintenance by SCRD Park staff. Staff recommend that an application be submitted to renew the license.
Thank you. To the board, discussion. Director Lee.
I fully support the recommendations. The local citizens group has asked to work with the SCRD and get approval to put some signs and some additional improvement in this specific area. We weren't aware that we actually had the foreshore, so this is extra good news for us. So I fully support the recommendations as submitted.
You move the recommendation?
I'd like to move the recommendations.
And a seconder? Seconded. Further discussion? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, just a couple of questions for staff. So the 2 site visits per year, is that kind of to meet liability issues in terms of parks land? Is that kind of the purpose of it?
The site visits are to ensure that the infrastructure is in place and working properly as expected, and to ensure there's not garbage or other risks.
Thank you. Director Hiltz again?
Sure. I'm interested in the foreshore aspect of them. That the foreshore is like, is there an enforceability? Like I'm looking, there are people mooring out in that foreshore area. There's one of the, you can go online and see some, that there was a dock or a float out there at one time, and people are mooring it. So is this something that the SCRD would actually enforce? Is the use of these foreshore lands, is that part of which the license of occupation for an institutional license? So that's why the enforceability of moorage in that foreshore area.
To Director Hall, whatever you are, General Manager Hall.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. The license of occupation includes certain conditions and responsibilities, and I believe that SCRD is not in a position to authorize any, for example, moorage activities under the conditions of the license. And should there be unauthorized activities occurring, SCRD would coordinate with the province on enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. See no further questions. Be moved and seconded. Call the question. All in favor? Thank you. It's approved. Thank you. And all right. Moving on to Annex G, item 9 on the agenda, and this is feedback to the Ministry of Agriculture regarding Class D slaughter license. And General Manager Hall.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. The Ministry of Agriculture is soliciting feedback on the geographic factors related to Class D slaughter licenses. So these are licenses that allow farmers in rural or remote areas, including the Sunshine Coast, to conduct on-farm slaughter of limited numbers of animals. Currently, meat processed through these licenses can only be sold within the region where it is processed. Staff referred the question to the Agricultural Advisory Committee. As well, input from the Sunshine Coast Farmers Institute was received. An extension until today has been granted by the province to respond to the request for information. So staff recommend, with advice provided by the AAC and the Farmers Institute, that the province consider expanding Class D license areas and that sales in adjacent regions be permitted. And a draft letter to this effect has been prepared and is included as Attachment B. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Director McMahon?
I would like to thank staff for their work on this and getting an extension to the deadline. That's great. And the feedback is great, and so I'm happy to move this recommendation.
Do you see a seconder? Seconded Director Hiltz. And this is all for a change. So we're all back at the table, and excellent. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. And that's passed. Thank you. Unanimously again. Okay, going to item 10, Annex H, and this is the request for proposal for the contract award for green waste container and hauling services, and refer this to Robin Cooper, Manager, Solid Waste Programs.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. The SCRD currently provides 3 locations for residents to self-haul and drop off green waste, and 2 locations for commercial green waste drop-off on the Sunshine Coast. The SCRD currently has contracts or agreements with Waste Management for container and hauling services, the Town of Gibsons for operating the South Coast drop-off site, and Salish Soils for processing all of the green waste into compost. On October 31st, 2019, the SCRD's contract for green waste container and hauling services will expire. So as such, in accordance with the SCRD's procurement policy, a request for proposals was issued. The term of the contract is 3 years with 2 additional 1-year renewal options. 2 compliant proposals were received. The evaluation team reviewed and scored the proposals against the criteria set out in the RFP, and it's recommended that the contract be awarded to Waste Management in the amount up to $264,743, as their proposal was the best value overall. And thank you, and staff welcome the opportunity to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Robin Cooper. Questions? Director McMahon?
Yes. Who is the current contractor?
Waste Management.
Thank you. Director Lee?
I noticed in one of the addendums that there was Indian Islands had a chunk of the contract. Does that remain in place?
Ms. Cooper?
No, would be the short answer.
Director
Then,
Lee?
oh, sorry.
Director Lee, go ahead.
Then they were previously a contractor and they are not doing that now?
Ms. Cooper?
Thank you for the question. The request for proposals was set up that proponents could bid on either any of the sites. So the proposal and subsequent contract award could have been awarded to 1 or 2 or all of the sites. But based on the report presented, the recommendation is to proceed with Waste Management for all of the services. Historically, Indian Isle has provided the service. I would have to check the records to see which request for proposal and subsequent award.
Thank you. Director McMahon?
Did this process go through before our new social procurement policy? I'm just curious to see which, new RFP processes go through under the new procurement policy.
Who would like to answer that?
Thank you for the question. The procurement policy, as you're aware, was recently adopted. However, I was advised by the manager of purchasing and risk management that certain processes have been in place that would reflect that current and newly adopted policy.
Good. Further questions? Someone care to move the recommendations? Director Hiltz, seconded. Seconded. All in discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. See none, that's approved. Thank you, Ms. Cooper. Mr. Lee, you look like you're thinking.
Yes, I was trying to figure out why this is all a surprise to me.
Okay.
And especially in light of the first comment when it was said that the same contractors were getting the job, which wasn't the case. Wasn't transparent to me. I'm not sure how we fix it to make it more transparent, but does that mean we have to review all RFPs or something, or what the heck goes on?
Okay.
Anyways, that's my concern. I'm busy trying to understand the whole issue, especially with the social procurement. Indian Islands is a long-time contractor, local from Pender. I don't like to see them. I don't like to see our smaller companies being cut out by larger companies. That's not how we should be doing it. We're losing local employment as it is up in Pender. So, not all that happy here. Anyways, that's my problem, I guess.
Perhaps that could be a further discussion with staff after the meeting. Thank you. Sorry. Moving on to Annex I. This is Community Emergency Preparedness Fund Volunteer and Composite Fire Department Training and Equipment Grant Application. And Matt Trite, Manager of Protective Services. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Actually, it's Ryan Daly, Half Moon Bay Fire Department, here on behalf of Matt Trite. Today we're recommending that an application be put forward to the UBCM on behalf of the SCRD and the 4 fire departments for a grant that's available through the Community of Emergency Preparedness Fund. The grant is for $100,000, which would be used equally by the 4 fire departments to purchase urban wildland firefighting gear.
Thank you. Board have any questions? Director McMahon?
Yeah, it's sort of related. This year we had to turn down a number of requests for grant and aids for firefighting equipment on places like the islands, Normanby and so forth. Is there any prospect of some grant funding that those groups could make use of?
Any response? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. There are avenues where those societies can as well apply for grants. However, this one we're speaking of is for composite and fire department only and improvement districts. So this one does not qualify for those societies at this time.
Thank you. Director Seegers.
2 things. One, to follow up on that. Perhaps if you're aware of that information, it could be funneled through staff to the directors, and because I know that they're in contact with the various societies and could forward that on to them for them to apply. That's for the funding for Thornby, et cetera. That's one. And then the second, I noticed in your application that it is anticipated you say, or like Matt's report, I guess. So it's anticipated the Pender Harbor and Sechelt Fire Departments are submitting their own applications to the same fund.
Any response to that?
I guess it'll just be a more of an update. Yes, we have been working with and Matt Trite as well. So we've all been talking to Thornby Island and other societies. Keats Island have one as well, Gambier, and we've been actually put them in touch with the local fire commissioner, and so they're dealing with them as well. So we are all working together with what resources we can to help our surrounding islanders. And yes, with in respect to the other fire chiefs, Pender Harbor and Sechelt has told us that they will be applying as well.
Thank you. Just a question. Is there any time limit relative to when this application has to be submitted by? Should this go to the board today for approval?
Yes, the application has to be submitted by November 15th.
Okay, so perhaps further recommendations, we move to the board meeting this afternoon, October 10th? Well, we do have another board meeting. It's just, do you want to? Okay, it's up to you. Yeah, we don't have to. Sorry?
I'd ask staff about that.
Staff, how do you feel? Would you like that to go forward today, or would you like that? Yeah. It's not a first come, first serve, I don't imagine. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we prefer that it would be sooner than later, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so motion that be moved to the board meeting on October 10th. Okay. Now, let's just add that to this recommendation. Okay. Director McMahon?
Okay, you're amending the recommendations?
I'm adding a recommendation.
Because if you're doing that, I'll second it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, to the whole recommendation. Good. Okay. With the addition. All right. So it's moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. That's approved. Thank you. Thank you. Director Lee. Yeah.
It's just a process question before the chief leaves.
Nope. Yeah, you missed it. Yeah.
Part of our discussions earlier were having an overall coordinator for all the fire departments and all the emergency responders, first responders. This item, I think, is something that we should be routine when the SCRD departments are taking advantage of something like this. We need to make sure the Sechelt, the Pender Harbor are all involved and we do it coordinated. These darn fires have a habit of jumping boundaries, so we want to be fully equipped for all areas. So my question is, we would expect that to happen as part of the process now, right? Or
Chief, any response?
Yes. With Matt Trey coming on board, we're all very excited on the collaboration of the fire department. And historically, we've been meeting together as coast-wide fire chiefs quarterly. We continue to do so. We all were working towards the same goals in Sunshine Coast. We do have mutual aid agreements in place. We do work together very well, and we always consider each other when we're making moves forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you can get out the door now. Thank you. Okay, turning the page. Item 12, Annex J, General Manager Planning and Community Development, a 2019 third quarter report. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. At the end of each quarter, staff prepare a summary report of work completed in the prior period, and staff have here the July to September period, and be pleased to answer any questions on the material. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any director have any questions regarding the report? Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair Beamish. Yeah, thanks again for the report. I still like them, right? These ones. We've been talking about reports. The question I have is on page 90. It's Area A, Pender Harbor installed 2 new dual language signs. I'm wondering what the dual languages are.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you for the question, Chair. I will probably butcher the pronunciation, but Shishachem, the Sechelt language. Thank you. Thank you. So that's a product of our work with the Sechelt Nation to be provided names for some of our parks, and we have about 15 of those signs going up, and the story that's associated with the name will be featured on the park's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Director McMahon.
Yeah, I was happy to see in on page 91 that Soames Hill Park has been moved into Area E. We'll take it. It's a really nice park. I was wondering on page 95 how admission visits are counted, because it's pretty hard to going over to the rec center is pretty hard to visualize 17,550 visits in 3 months. Of course, I assume a lot of these are repeat visits for various reasons, like Mayor Beamish goes and works out at the fitness room there, so he's probably 60 of those visits,
One.
But I would like at a future time to understand better how these statistics are generated, and how much we know about the people who use our programs. Like, what age are they? Are a lot of these frequent flyers? Are they people visiting from off coast for a hockey game? Like, how do we count these numbers? How are we doing this? I would just like to analyze the usage of our programs a little better. Maybe not on a every quarter basis, but on an occasional basis to take a look. I also talked to the Elphinstone Community Association last night, and one of the questions that they asked me was the programs that are put together and sent out in the annual, or not, quarterly flyer for recreation, how are they chosen? Is there a policy? Is there a program design? Is there an intent? Are we trying to do so many programs for children and so many for adults? Or like, what's the vision here? Anyway, that's and it just in general, and it comes up again with playing fields, but when we're trying to make decisions about different kinds of programs, it's really helpful to get a sense of who's being served by them and how many people and, the usage. So, because all of these things are expensive, and we're often trying to weigh apples and oranges. And so if there's a way to collect more data, it would be helpful.
Mr. Hall, do you have a response?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Staff can bring back some information to address the questions raised by the director.
Yeah.
Thanks.
One of the questions I often get in Gibson's is that there's no kind of facility up there, or opportunity facility up there for seniors programming, specifically for seniors activities. Is there I think there's some suggestion that when the recreation center was envisioned, that there would be a seniors room, but now there's kids rooms and teens rooms and other rooms, and the thought was is a seniors program specifically available. And I know they use Harmony Hall, but it was Upper Gibson's areas specifically. Just a comment. So the report has been received. Director Pratt?
Just a couple of questions. I see the short-term rental accommodation is referenced. Just wanted an estimate on when we can, because I know we're all getting questions from the community. Just wanted to know when that report's coming forward.
Mr. Hall?
Yes, thank you for the question, Chair. That item is a priority for staff, and staff are pleased with both the volume and quality of feedback received at the public hearing, and we're just in the process of a final review of recommended amendments following the public hearing. Staff had worked diligently with the goal of having it at today's meeting, but some final technical review is needed relating to definitional and technical questions, and staff are working hard to have it at the November Planning Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your report. Okay, moving now to Annex K, which is the Agricultural Advisory Committee minutes. And is there anything arising from these? These have been received as part of the reports. Anything arising from that Director would like to refer to or discuss? Seeing nothing, we'll go to Annex L, which is the Egmont Pender Harbor Advisory Commission. Director Lee, do you have anything you want to comment on in that report?
On page 102, I was, I guess I was quite happy that the APC spent so much time on our strategic plan. I was a little concerned about the comments, though, and I'm not sure whether now is the time to talk about it or when we review the plan itself. But it's something to think about, and that is, have we given enough time between giving it to the APC and we start doing the final approval process? It seems like somehow we should have got it there earlier and got the comments earlier so we could include them in our plan more. So it's something to think about. But I must say I was very happy they spent so much time on it. Thought I'd point that out.
I believe you'll see that all the electoral areas also discuss the plan as well, and that it is going to come up this afternoon on the agenda, so that you might want to hold that thought and keep this list handy. Okay, thank you. Okay, moving then to Half Moon Bay, Electoral Area B, Rural Planning, and I'm sorry, this is the Advisory Planning Commission. Any comments?
Not specifically as the area director. They also made comments on the strategic plan regarding invasive species and parks, but I mean we can have that conversation this afternoon as well. I think the one of the concerns is the report of Asian wasps, which is were a bit of a problem on Vancouver Island, but otherwise no other comments.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, just in reference to the invasive species, where are we with the invasive species task force of the SCRD? I don't recall that they have met in some very lengthy time. At least I haven't seen any minutes, so I was just wondering what's happening there.
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Before the summer break, the committee considered a report whereby staff analyzed and provided some recommendations related to consultant work on an invasive species strategy for the Sunshine Coast. And the committee at that time directed that the consultant's work along with the staff report be referred to that working group, I believe also to First Nations and member municipalities. And that work paused momentarily due to vacancies, and staff will be continuing the work shortly to get feedback on that strategy and staff's recommendations or analysis, including recommendations for possible next steps, and bringing that back to this committee for decision. Thank you.
Is that okay? Thank you. Okay, moving now to Annex N for Roberts Creek Advisory Planning Commission. Mr. Howard, do you have any?
I can provide two additional comments from Director Ties, who attended the meeting. The first is in relation, you'll note in the minutes, that there was a somewhat lengthy discussion of proposed zoning amendment bylaw related to a property referred to as the Morrissey property. I think Director Ties would convey that there is strong concern amongst the APC and OCPC and the community in general related to this application. He expects to speak to that when it is next on the PCDC agenda. And a second comment that is aimed at the draft strategic plan, which I understand is still in public consultation. that the input from the APC was that, at least with respect to water supply and as well to climate change, there should be a greater sense of urgency expressed in terms of meeting the needs of water supply and taking action in relation to climate change. So I will pass on those comments for the edification of the board and reference for staff.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Any further discussion? None. Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair Beamish. There was on page 107, there was the mention about the covenants, and this has come up with regard to another application. And are these successful tools in actually maintaining forest cover? That's what this comment would suggest, that a covenant is not a useful tool to maintain forest cover. So I'm just wondering, is this fact or opinion, and whether staff has a comment on that? And I have another question after that.
You're referencing the second point, second bullet on page 107? Yeah.
Yes.
Staff, any comment on that? It's top of page. It states that there were comments about the covenant on these properties for forest cover, and it was noted that this property has not maintained forest cover.
Thank you for the question, Chair. I think staff would like the opportunity to consider that point and take note of the APC's raising it, and we'll look to address it in the forthcoming staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, see nothing further. Oh, sorry, Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair Beamish. Yeah, it's again on page 107, and this is I think the discussion is about how the public is informed about the conditions around properties, and they make a reference to the property report that comes out of the SCRD GIS, and it is true that so my question is, has staff considered enhancing kind of the information that comes out of that property report, such as, are you in the garbage collection, are you in fire protection, what is the zoning, what is the land use? And the current report is very nuts and bolts about property size, but doesn't get into the issues of informing the public about what is actually the conditions that run with the property. So is there, in the work plan, looking at enhancing the property report that comes out of the GIS system?
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, staff did take note of this question, or this suggestion, I guess, and felt that it had a high degree of merit, and will look at it. And further, staff would note there's a clear alignment between this and some of the tactics described in the draft strategic plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, moving now to Elphinstone Advisory Planning Commission, Annex O. Director McMahon, do you have anything you'd like to raise from that? Okay, seeing nothing, we'll go down to electoral area F again. Yeah, and you have nothing to say? Thank you.
Oh,
my. Okay. Thank you. Note, thank you. Okay, thank you very much for those reports, and now we'll move to communications. And we have a Annex Q, item 19. We have a communications from Kim Turnat, Constituency Assistant to Nicholas Simon, regarding government funding for age-friendly community assessments and action plans. This is for receipt and move for receipt and seconded. All in favor? Any discussion of this, or you can act accordingly? I know that I've passed this on to our Councillor D'Andrade in Gibsons regarding her work with the seniors there, so that's what we're looking at. So, Director Seegers?
Yes, and I did the same with the seniors planning table.
Yeah.
So forwarded on to them, because they're looking, they just came out with their report on isolation with seniors up and down the coast.
No.
And this could potentially feed into developing some strategies to address that.
Good. Okay. Okay, seeing nothing further. Item 20, I believe, has been dealt with. Yep. Item 21, climate adaptation, verbal from somebody.
Who may be in Portugal right now.
Director Hall.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Without putting any members of the committee on the spot, staff included this at the what we understood to be the request of Director McMahon. Thank you.
Sorry, and there are a number of discussion points around climate emergency that if I can defer this, we're going to take it to a future meeting. But thank you very much.
If I could just comment on this as well, is that one of the things that we did on that date when the students were protesting and the meetings were held in Gibsons and in Area F, our staff got together and they did quite a good workshop on climate adaptation and issues. And they created quite a good visual on that. And it might be sometime when we're discussing this to have one of those staff come and present that to the board just to show their ideas generated by staff. I came late to that meeting. It was a Friday that the UBCM was winding up, but I was able to report to them the results of the debates and resolutions relative to climate change that were on the board, or the UBCM agenda. So that it was a very good initiative on the part of staff to have done that, so that if you wish at some future date to have that as part of maybe a delegation, a presentation, show how our staff had generated ideas around climate change and climate mitigation and adaptation issues through their discussions. So, okay, we're going to move now to in camera. Sorry. Okay, Director Seegers.
Thank you. This is to Director McMahon and through you to staff. This item, we're looking to defer this. Do you want to bring it back when you're ready to do that, or do you want staff to bring it back to the next meeting? How would you like us to address this?
It was brought to my attention that we have a lot of notices of motion circling. And one of them is for the climate emergency declaration and all the actions arising from that. And with Director Ties being off coast, we were going to discuss that and rationalize all of our motions before we end up with a snowstorm of motions at the board.
So I guess, do you want it at the next meeting? Like, because I think we need to give staff some direction about when this should come back.
Yeah.
Or should we say, 2 months hence, or in October, that would be December, January?
Oh, do we?
Nothing specific, just to a further meeting?
Can I be bailed out by our interim CAO?
Mr. Brown?
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Yes, as indicated by Director McMahon, we have been looking at the various resolutions from some of the directors and trying to formulate an implementation and action plan from staff as far as the background information, resources needed required for the various motions. So I guess I'm reluctant to give a firm date, but we'll endeavor to get at least some of the items brought forward to the next PCD.
I guess, do we need a motion to defer this to a future meeting? Or will it just disappear if we don't?
Director Pratt?
I'll say that I know this won't disappear. Okay. As our CAO has stated, we actually already have a meeting planned to discuss a lot of these motions that are coming forward. So we've already got that set up in the calendar. So this will definitely come forward. We don't have to worry about deferring it. And if it does defer, I know I'll be strung up by my toes by a couple of directors. So.
Yeah. Director Lee.
I agree we need to sort through the whole thing and start to understand it a little better ourselves and develop some real plans, which in fact we have. There's a few things in the building code, like you have to have your house a certain distance above the... So we need to talk about what we have done as well as what we are planning to do and what we should be doing I think we need to make a full meal deal of it so we understand where we're going.
I'll just comment as well. We did have a community dialogue recently on our strategic plan, and it was very evident that climate change was top of mind for a number of the participants. We have a section of the plan that deals with climate change. I think it was around our priority 4 or something, and I've now moved that up to be priority 1, given the kind of and that's just one of ordering in the document, but I wanted to make it more forefront. And we have a number of actions under that once our strategic plan is implemented, we will be implementing those actions. And it does deal with, for example, declaring a climate emergency as one of those strategic priorities. And so we'll be looking at that. So thank you. So I now have the motion to read for in camera, and that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with Section 91A of the Community Charter. Personnel information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent with the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. So a motion to move in camera. Moved, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And now go to inquiries. Anybody have a question at this point? No, let's see, we're losing our audience. And media, no media? Okay, thank you. And so we now adjourn to in camera. Thank you.